So earlier this evening, not that long ago, we had some breaking news out of New York, where a judge has now rejected Donald Trump's motion to vacate his criminal conviction on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records to cover up an alleged affair. Now, Trump's legal team had argued that his guilty verdict should be tossed out in light of the Supreme Court's ruling on immunity, claiming that testimony from former White House employees should not have been entered into evidence. But Judge Juan Merchan, who oversees the case, disagreed, saying in part, the people's use of these acts as evidence of the decidedly personal acts of falsifying business records poses no danger of intrusion on the authority and function of the executive branch. And I've been wanting to talk to people about what this all means, and I have the perfect people joining me now, Democratic Congressman and former prosecutor Eric Swalwell and former spokesperson at the Department of Justice Anthony Coley. So, Congressman, I read this as the justice system at the state level working, and this basically meaning that Trump's not exactly off the hook. But how did you read it? How should people digest what the ruling tonight means?
Well, not everyone is going to roll over for him, as we are seeing right now. As you know, the billionaire class is certainly doing that, trying to curry favor with the new president. And Americans are asking, okay, but like, what do I get out of that? And what they're seeing with this ruling is that what you get out of it is Donald Trump is still going to be treated the way anyone else would be treated. I also have my own civil case with January 6 police officers against Donald Trump for what he did on January 6th, and we're actually moving down the track. We won at the district court level on immunity. We won unanimously at the Court of Appeals. He appealed it to the Supreme Court and then withdrew that. So we're in depositions right now. And so we may be one of the only trees standing in the forest, but we're still seeking accountability. And I think it's important for people to know that that's still happening.
It's so interesting that that's such a good example. I'm so glad you shared that. Anthony, you're like the Forrest Gump of communicators in government. But, you know, one of your past jobs was to help explain legal issues to the public. Right. So what should people understand who are not lawyers or not former prosecutors about this ruling?
Well, the congressman said it right. Not everyone will roll over, but the ones who will, they matter. And now those are conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court. And I have every expectation that eventually this case will make its way to the Supreme Court, and the conservatives there are going to overrule it. And I say that because the Supreme Court is fundamentally broken, Jen. I think of the fact that there are people there who don't belong right now. Neil Gorsuch. There are at least 2 justices we know that are considering cases where they should be recused. And collectively, the conservatives are ignoring decades and decades of precedent, like turning over things like Roe v. Wade, to enact a policy agenda. And the emphasis is on policy, because if you rewind the tape, if you go back to the 1980s, the conservative Republican Attorney General Edwin Meese put together a blueprint about how conservatives could use the courts to enact a policy agenda. And so now that we have conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court in the majority, we have conservatives controlling both houses of Congress and a nominal conservative in the White House, they are not going to let Donald Trump be the only president to suffer the indignity of having a criminal conviction.
So since you're an actual former prosecutor, do you think this goes to the Supreme Court? Let me ask you a second part of this question. There are a bunch of other cases that everybody's kind of assumed will never see the light of day again, right? The Georgia case, obviously Jack Smith made his announcement. Does the ruling today change any of that or change your perception of that?
Well, I agree with Anthony. I mean, he's going to take it up to the Supreme Court. He is hell-bent on this idea that he's king. But to most Americans, the people that I grew up with, they don't want to get involved in this red team, blue team, as Anthony said, conservative court or a liberal court. They just want to know, did you run for president for the right reasons? Right. Did you run to help me and the cost of what, you know, I'm paying at the grocery store? Right. Or is this just about making all of your criminal cases go away and putting your rich friends in positions of power? And if this is where he's going to put his focus, I think he's going to find he's going to lose the American people pretty quickly.
Let me ask, there's a political question I have to ask you, because you know, he is the first person to run as a convicted felon. This now confirms he will be the first president to be a convicted felon. I'm not sure that's something that's a pride and joy for us. But the country still elected him. If you're Democrats running for office, they're off your elections this year. There are midterms people have already announced. Do you talk about that, or do you not talk about it anymore?
What, the conviction, you mean?
Yeah, him being a convicted felon as president, people standing by the convicted felon as president.
You know, I think people need to focus, elected officials need to focus on the issues that matter in people's lives. And if I am a senator or even a Democratic senator in Washington, I am looking for opportunities to do that, to find that common ground, right? Like every Trump nominee is not crazy. Like trying to find the right world. There are, like Marco Rubio is not going to embarrass the country on the world stage, right? Stephen Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury nominee. Doug Burgum, right, the former governor of North Dakota. These are people who reasonable Democrats should take a hard look at. And if they're qualified and they're not going to embarrass them, Democrats should find the opportunity to support them.
And if he's looking for somebody to work with on immigration, innovation, reducing crime, he's going to find the best partner in me. If he's going to let his corrupt instincts get in the way, he's going to find the strongest wall. And so it's an opportunity for him.
He's got good communication staff.
You're good. He's a good person to validate. Congressman Eric Swalwell, Anthony Coley, my old friend, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us. And coming up, yes, we are going to talk about the drone.
So speaking of the holidays, 2 years ago on Thanksgiving Day, so Thanksgiving Day 2022, the leader of one of the world's highest profile car companies made a surprise Thanksgiving Day announcement. He told people who owned his company's cars that as of that day, they no longer had to drive their cars. Starting that day, Thanksgiving Day, the cars would be able to drive themselves from here on out. Quote, Tesla full self-driving beta is now available to anyone in North America who requests it from their car screen, assuming you have bought this option. Congratulations to Tesla Autopilot/AI team on achieving a major milestone. So this is 2 years ago, again, 2022, Thanksgiving Day. Not really any warning this was coming, just, hey, if you bought a Tesla when you had the option when you bought it to pay a little bit extra so it would be capable of driving itself someday, if that day ever came, well, that day has come. Happy Thanksgiving. It was Thanksgiving Day. The company CEO put out that announcement. Within a few hours, it had led to some news.
Now at 5, 16 people, including 8 kids, were part of a multi-car crash on the Bay Bridge, causing some major traffic tie-ups.
They say it happened so fast. A chain reaction crash eastbound on the Bay Bridge and inside the Yerba Buena Tunnel.
I thought I was a goner at first when it happened. I mean, you see something like that, it's like coming towards you at full speed. I thought, well, this is it.
So that was Thanksgiving Day 2022. Just a few months later, the news outlet The Intercept obtained video that showed that accident as it happened. It turns out it was a Tesla whose owner says the car was in full self-driving mode and the car just randomly braked super hard in the middle of the tunnel, which is what started that huge pileup of cars in the tunnel, the one that injured all those people.
Until today, we only saw the aftermath of the chain reaction crash last Thanksgiving Day. Drive-by video of cars stacked up in the Yerba Buena Tunnel, eastbound on the Bay Bridge, and a traffic jam that lasted hours. But Bay Bridge surveillance video now shows how it started. A 76-year-old lawyer from San Francisco told the CHP his white 2021 Tesla Model S was in full self-driving mode when it suddenly deployed the brakes. A total of 8 vehicles crashed, 9 people injured, including a 2-year-old boy. Just hours before the crash, Tesla CEO Elon Musk announced the launch of the full self-driving beta version, which he called a major milestone. But there are a growing number of reports of the Tesla technology unexpectedly slamming on the brakes. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration assigned a special crash investigation team to look into what happened. They're already investigating dozens of incidents involving advanced driver assistance systems from Volvos, Cadillacs, Hyundai, Genesis, and Cruise, but mostly Tesla.
Mostly Teslas. And, you know, car crashes happen. We humans aren't all that great at avoiding the problem of hurting and killing ourselves and each other with our cars. Car crashes are a plague, and who among us can say whether robots might be better at driving than us overall, writ large? But in a country with more than 280 million cars and trucks on the road, clearly it's worth studying if we're going to make this change, right? It's worth studying whether letting robots drive our cars is going to be more or less safe than having us humans drive the cars. Well, the U.S. government is doing that studying. You saw a reference in that news report there to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration looking into that particular crash and others like it. Well, the year before that big Thanksgiving Day crash in the Bay Area, that government agency started a program where car companies have to report when crashes happen while a car has been in autopilot or in full self-driving mode. They have to tell the government when that happens. So that means crashes like that one that happened in the tunnel in 2022 in the San Francisco Bay Area. Also from this other terrible crash that was right nearby in Contra Costa County in California the following year. This was a fire truck that got slammed into at speed by a Tesla that was on autopilot. The Tesla driver was killed. 4 firefighters were sent to the hospital in that crash. Earlier this year, the agency released its report on its findings after collecting all of this data for several years. It led to headlines like this, quote, Tesla's autopilot and full self-driving linked to hundreds of crashes and dozens of deaths. Government report described the data about these hundreds of crashes, but it also gave the specific details of some of them, including one particularly harrowing one from North Carolina. A 10th grader stepped off of a school bus. The school bus was doing everything right. It was pulled over. It had its lights flashing, had all the warning signals that a school bus activates when it's letting off students to let everybody know around there that they need to stop. School bus was doing everything right. The kid was doing everything right. But a 2022 Model Y Tesla on autopilot mode nevertheless whipped around the stopped school bus and slammed into this kid, this 10th grader, who had to be medevaced to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. By the time that government report was issued, not only had individual crashes like that received a lot of local attention in the areas where they happened, but the overall problem was starting to come into focus. Reuters, for example, had already reported that a criminal investigation into these matters was underway targeting Tesla. Tesla had already disclosed in an SEC filing that it had received federal subpoenas for information about its full self-driving mode and its autopilot mode. Then just a few weeks ago, the government announced the opening of a formal federal investigation of Tesla's full self-driving mode in more than 2 million Teslas, more than 2 million cars. And that's a big deal. But you might have noticed that I said that report happened a few weeks ago. To be specific, that happened, the announcement of that federal investigation, that big, potentially very consequential federal investigation, the announcement of that happened in mid-October. What's happened between mid-October and now? Since then, you might have seen that Tesla's CEO, Elon Musk, has basically had himself surgically attached to Donald Trump's body. I mean, seriously, are they stitched together? Can either one of them get dressed alone at this point? And of course, Donald Trump won the presidential election last month. And so what happens now to anybody who is unsettled by the idea of a robot-controlled car driving itself into a nearby fire engine full of firefighters? Or a robot-controlled car slamming on its brakes without warning in the middle of a crowded tunnel full of cars going 55 miles an hour while people are all driving to go see family on Thanksgiving Day? What happens to anybody who might have those kinds of concerns? Reuters headline, quote, exclusive. Trump team wants to scrap car crash reporting rule. The Trump transition has apparently surveyed the landscape of public policy in the United States of America and has decided, you know what really needs to go? What needs to go as a matter of priority is this thing that we've had for a few years now where car companies have to report it when their car is on autopilot and it crashes into something. That's the new priority, apparently, Quote, the Trump transition team wants the incoming administration to drop a car crash reporting requirement opposed by Elon Musk's Tesla, a move that could cripple the government's ability to investigate and regulate the safety of vehicles with automated driving systems. Musk, the world's richest person, spent more than $250 million helping Trump get elected president in November. Removing the crash disclosure provision would particularly benefit Tesla, which has reported most of the crashes, more than 1,500 of them, to federal safety regulators under this program. Tesla has been targeted in National Highway Traffic Safety Administration investigations, including 3 stemming from this specific data. Now, what is the purported justification for getting rid of this rule and getting rid of it now? I mean, they can't just say, well, this guy paid for the presidential election. Therefore, he kind of bought himself a government, and so he gets what he wants, right? You can't really just say that. Hey, you kids getting off school buses, watch yourself. Unless and until you can start paying for your own president, you're fair game on the side of the road. I mean, you can't say it that way. So how do you... They have to say something that sounds better than that. Well, this is what they came up with. Quote, the recommendation to kill the crash reporting rule came from a transition team tasked with producing a 100-day strategy for automotive policy. The group called the measure a mandate for, quote, excessive data collection. Oh, excessive data collection. That's the problem that needs to be addressed here in this photo. Excessive data collection. We have way too much data. Our thumb drives are all full. If we keep collecting all this data about self-driving cars killing people, eventually our phones will slow down or something. Too much data, clogging everything up. Excessive data collection. Quote, a Reuters analysis of the NHTSA crash data shows Tesla accounted for 40 out of the 45 crashes reported to the agency through October 15th. 40 out of the 45 fatal incidents reported. That sounds bad if you're Tesla, right? If you're Tesla, better to not have people ever hear numbers like that. Therefore, don't collect the numbers anymore. Stop collecting all this excessive data. Problem solved. Problem solved for Tesla and for Elon Musk. Problem not solved for the Contra Costa County firefighters who were in that truck. Problem not solved for the 8 kids in the giant smash-up in the Thanksgiving Day tunnel crash. Problem not solved for the 10th grader medevaced to the hospital in North Carolina after stepping off the school bus that the Tesla slammed into, right? Problem not solved for them, but it is solved for the billionaire. I should note that this reporting from Reuters is based on a document that Reuters saw. We haven't seen the document ourselves. We have also reached out to Tesla and to the Trump transition for comment. So far, we have not heard back. I'll let you know.
We've been listening together to Madison, Wisconsin Police Chief Sean Barnes. The mayor of Madison is also there. We've heard from her and other officials. They've been providing an update on a tragic situation that unfolded this morning when a gunman opened fire inside a school. 3 people are, as of this hour, dead. That includes the shooter. 6 people were injured and then transported to area hospitals. Police say their injuries range from minor to life-threatening. The shooter is a teenager and a student at the school, which is a small private Christian school with fewer than 400 students. Those students range from kindergartners to 12th graders. The shooting taking place just days before a scheduled Christmas holiday break. At this hour, police say they are combing through the area for any evidence or anything really that could provide some information on exactly what happened and why. But they do not believe that there is an ongoing threat to the public at this time. Police say that they do not know the shooter's motive. It's where we start today with former Assistant Director for Counterintelligence at the FBI, senior MSNBC National Security and Intelligence Analyst Frank Figliuzzi's back. Here with me at the table, NBC News National Law Enforcement and Intelligence Correspondent Tom Winters back, and Democratic strategist and professor at Columbia University, MSNBC political analyst Basil Smichels back. Tom Winter, what do we know?
So a couple of details from that press conference, some of which are new, which is the fact that the shooter allegedly used a handgun in the commission of this crime today. We're looking at 2 individuals at the school. We don't know yet with certainty, and I apologize. I made a little bit of a cutoff in the top of the press conference, so maybe the chief addressed it, but at least 2 individuals at the school are deceased, a number that are injured, ranging from minor injuries to life-threatening injuries. Don't know yet if those are students or teachers that were involved. As far as the individual that is responsible for the shooting, also identified as a juvenile who attends that school. Now, what we don't know, this school goes from kindergarten to 12th grade, so we don't know the age. That's a huge spread, obviously, but we don't know the age. We don't yet have a motive. That's not surprising. We're less than 6 hours or so into this, and so we wouldn't necessarily have that information at this stage unless they had some sort of writing or made a statement prior to this. The chief said something I think interesting. They're going to wait for the medical examiner to make a determination, but he pointed out that when officers went in the school, the shooter was already deceased. So obviously this happened ahead of time. There's only 2 potential outcomes there, is that this was a self-inflicted gunshot wound or that somebody else there had a gun, but I think he would have said so if that was the case. Taking a step back here, having covered I don't know how many school shootings, I'm not going to do the math, covering the Newtown school shooting, which is occurred 12 years ago, plus 2 days. The impact on this community, whether the shooting happens in February, June, September, or December, just a week or so before Christmas, it's always going to be traumatic. But the way it impacts around the holidays of these families and these kids is very, very difficult. And that community will go through a very difficult time in the next couple of weeks. And so it was refreshing to see as strong and clear and detailed the information that we had from that police chief. It was nice to hear them kind of bring it back towards the victims and the families at the end, because that is very important. And having done this early in my career, all the focus all the time on the suspect, who did it, why did they do it, what was going on. And over the years, in speaking with these groups and speaking with victims groups, that is such a huge component, and that's the everlasting component of it. And so it's kind of changed my approach a little bit, and that's why the reason I mention it here today. But again, still need to determine how the weapon was obtained, who this kid was, the motive behind it, and then figure out if anybody else is going to face charges, though there's been no indication that to date that anybody else is involved in this.
It's such an interesting point that you make, and I'm so changed by Fred Guttenberg and his daughter Jamie, and Fred's service in doing, I mean, you arrived at what you're describing, sort of a victim-focused lens through which you view these by covering so many of them. I have sat here while Uvalde was unfolding, while Parkland was unfolding, but I think with all of Fred's admonitions in mind, lives were changed of the victims' families forever.
Right.
I mean, forever. December 16th will mean something different to these families forever. And coming 2 days after the anniversary of Newtown, I believe the 12-year anniversary
Correct.
of Newtown, is beyond haunting.
Yeah.
But we start tonight with Donald Trump's growing threats against the media and the freedom of the Fourth Estate. Trump talking to reporters today about his latest targets.
I want to expand on the defamation lawsuits. Could you see moving that to other people with individual platforms, social media influencers, people that...
Or newspapers, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I do. I think you have to do it. I'm going to be bringing one against the people in Iowa, their newspaper. We're filing one on 60 Minutes, a big part of CBS News, against Bob Woodward. And we have one, very interestingly, on Pulitzer. We have to straighten out the press.
I mean, I don't blame you if you weren't able to keep track, because in the space of just a few minutes, Trump lobbing threats against the following: the Des Moines Register, 60 Minutes, CBS News, Bob Woodward, and the Pulitzer Prize Committee. Trump's attacks on the media are making headlines and sparking new fears of retribution against journalists trying to hold public figures to account. ABC just settling for millions of dollars a defamation lawsuit brought by Trump. And news outlets are now preparing for unprecedented legal attacks against them in Trump's second term. Top lawyers at Axios reportedly warning that Trump officials will attempt to force reporters to out their sources, will ramp up lawsuits against news organizations for defamation, and could charge journalists with crimes using the Espionage Act. Here's our former Washington Post editor, Marty Baron, recently outlined the dangers.
He's salivating for the opportunity to prosecute and imprison journalists for leaks of national security information. He'll classify more and scale back things like the Freedom of Information Act. I think he'll put pressure on owners. He will encourage his allies to bring libel suits. He'll try to put pressure on advertisers. They intend to go after the press in every conceivable way.
Trump and his MAGA allies have made it clear what the end goal is: a more obedient and obsequious press.
The media's tamed down a little bit. They're liking us much better now, I think. If they don't, we'll have to just take them on again, and we don't want to do that.
Joining me now is E.J. Dionne, columnist with The Washington Post, and Hugo Lowell, senior political correspondent with The Guardian. My thanks to both of you for getting us started tonight. E.J., I want to start with you. Why? Why obey in advance with someone like Donald Trump?
I think that's the right question. And I think the list of threats that Marty Baron put forward is very important. And I also think it's especially important that large media institutions that can afford to defend all these lawsuits actually not fold before this threat. Because if large institutions start giving in, what's going to happen to the smaller ones? And I think one of the problems of litigation of this sort is that for organizations without much money, this is an enormous barrier to go to reporting. It can put a lot of those places out of business if they decide to fight these lawsuits. And up to now, the courts have been very sympathetic to the idea that the public has a right to know that a free press is enshrined in the Constitution and that they have to have the freedom to report on what's happening in the government. So this is a very, very serious thing that Trump is threatening, just as Marty Baron outlined.
You know, Hugo, the problem for me is it seems as if it's not just obeying in advance, but the problem is also you're almost buying some type of access to Donald Trump. It's if you're not going to play ball, then you're going to be an enemy. And so you either settle a defamation lawsuit the way that ABC did, or you kind of kowtow in advance and you kind of say, you know what, I've done the cost benefit analysis and it makes better sense for me and my financial bottom line to be able to keep a safe distance from you if you're Donald Trump.
Yeah, the ABC settling that defamation suit really was not helpful to anyone in the press, frankly, because that only has emboldened people in Trump world. You know, if you talk to the lawyers this weekend over what happened, they're very, very happy. Like, you know, this is fantastic. You know, this opens up the path for them to sue other news outlets, other individual reporters, and they're absolutely discussing this. I mean, the moment they were done with the ABC suit, the discussion shifted to, ooh, who's next? Maybe it's CBS. We really didn't like that 60 Minutes thing. And then on Sunday night at the New York Young Republican Club Gala, which I attended, you know, the keynote speaker was Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon was talking about it's time to prosecute the news media and people on this network as well. And so what has previously been confined to the ethers of the MAGA universe is now coming out to the fore, and they're feeling emboldened to do it. And I think we should take this extremely seriously because they're saying it out loud now.
You know, EJ, this is nothing new when you look at a history of autocrats. Part of the way that they are effective in being able to control the people is to control the narrative. And I'm not trying to be, you know, kind of casual when I say that the press should keep that line of demarcation, the independence from being able to have to be fearing somebody like Donald Trump. But I also understand that there is a logistical and financial implication that becomes a part of the analysis. But at this point, it's like, why not just say that all independent media doesn't exist really, and that everything ends up being just state propaganda?
I at least for now. And I agree with Hugo that they're settling that suit is problematic going forward. But right now, we still have a free press. Right now, we still have institutions that historically have stood up. If you go back to the Pentagon Papers case and the New York Times and the Washington Post standing up to enormous amounts of pressure. Now, you do with media companies have these very complicated set of interests these days that I think makes these issues even more difficult. But your premise is right that if you can have people in power using whatever tools they have, whether it's defamation suits or other powers the government has, for example, to prosecute on leaks, then you will have a situation where you've got leaders trying to intimidate the press into supporting them, or at least not reporting things that are inconvenient to them. The term that Trump used, straightening them out, put a little chill up on my spine when I heard it at the beginning of the show.
You know, Hugo, former Time magazine editor Rick Stengel wrote that Trump has sued dozens of publications and media outlets in order to intimidate the press into self-censorship, not to actually win any particular case. I mean, I have to ask, do you agree with that concept? Because we all knew the history of how litigious Donald Trump is, a courtroom, a lawsuit. He's no stranger to that. But in this instance, what I found to be very interesting about that quote from Rick is that it's called self-censorship. It's one thing to have to sue or try to prosecute a suit, and then you get a result. It's a whole other thing to bend the knee in advance and to do, as we've been talking about and as Tim Snyder talks about, is obeying in advance.
Look, you're already seeing some of the examples in the mainstream media, right? Like, it doesn't come down to individual reporters. I don't see individual reporters on the Trump beat or covering the White House, self-censoring their reporting and pulling punches. But we have seen executives at other, media companies, for instance, the LA Times and elsewhere, kind of wade into what are editorial spheres and try and impart what they think should be the way that the news is being delivered. And sometimes, I mean, if you are a media executive, I can totally understand, where the thinking comes from. For instance, if you have financial interests, if you have M&A activity that you want to be green-lit in the coming admin, I can see why you would maybe not want to upset Trump or get on his bad side in a way that he might, block a deal. And so there is going to be this colossal fight between media executives if they feel like they need to come in and wade in on reporting matters, and individual reporters and editors who I think feel very, very strongly, especially in Washington and on the White House beat in particular, that what they're doing is a public service and that they shouldn't pull punches. But we'll have to see. It's really complicated.
EJ, Hugo just very subtly dropped that M&A language in there, this idea that potential future business dealings like a merger and acquisition could be impacted by whether or not you provide the right kind of coverage, wink, wink, of the current administration. If that's the case, then shouldn't we just dispel with the BS of the idea that this is a, quote, independent fourth estate, if this is a particular outlet or publication, and that you really aren't actually delivering the news, you really are just delivering something that's skewed by what you're fearing is potentially going to happen?
I pray that never happens, but I think you saw it in the first Trump administration where they were wielding these threats against mergers involving media companies. And I think what it requires, maybe this is very old-fashioned to me, but I think what it requires is if you own a media company, you have to have the guts, the courage, the determination to resist that kind of pressure. Now, I suppose that's easy for me to say. I don't have billions of dollars on the line in any of these deals. But I think that's the responsibility you take in a democratic republic when you own a media institution. And I think a lot of people in the first Trump term did resist that. There was pressure the first time around from Trump in these matters, and the media kept reporting what needed to get reported. And I think we're just going to have to look to people who own these companies to say, if I'm going to be in this business, I'm going to take the responsibilities that are involved in this business, and I'm going to take them seriously.
Well, let me tell you guys, as I say goodbye, there really isn't anybody who's better situated, though, than big companies that have the financial wherewithal to withstand an onslaught when it comes to litigation versus just the average day American citizen. E.J. Dionne and Hugo Lowell, thanks so much for getting us started tonight.
And we begin tonight with the drone mystery on the eastern seaboard. Now, for those of you who do not live on the East Coast, I'm talking about the nearly daily drone sightings over the past month. First spotted in New Jersey on November 18th, they appear to show up in the late hours of the night, although there's still a lot that we do not know about them, like if they're present every single night. And it is precisely the what we don't know that is driving interest in them and demands that the federal government provide answers. New York Governor Kathy Hochul announced that the federal government is sending high-tech drone detection resources. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy has also asked the White House for more federal resources to investigate the sightings. Former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan posted about what he saw over his house, although students of astronomy were quick to point out that most of what he filmed was the constellation Orion. The Biden administration has provided some insight into this mystery. The government agencies investigating the sightings, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, said they have no evidence at this time that the reported drone sightings pose a national security or public safety threat or have a foreign nexus. But since they've been unable to say where these objects came from or what they're doing, the people who've decided they know exactly what's happening have filled the void. Like noted conspiracy theorist Marjorie Taylor Greene, who flat out said the government is in control of the drones and refuses to tell the American people what's going on. Of course, there's no evidence to suggest that whatsoever. But she's got plenty of company in MAGA world believing that, all the way up to the highest levels. Trump ally Steve Bannon suggested the same thing at a New York Young Republicans Club event over the weekend. Last week, Donald Trump called for the drones to be shot down and suggested the government knows more than it's telling, a claim he made again today at a press conference.
The government knows what is happening. Look, our military knows where they took off from. Our military knows, and our president knows. And for some reason, they want to keep people in suspense. I can't imagine it's the enemy, because if it was the enemy, they'd blast it out. Even if they were late, they'd blast it. Something strange is going on. For some reason, they don't want to tell the people, and they should.
It turns out tonight, a National Security Council spokesman says the government believes the sightings to include a combination of lawful commercial drones, hobbyist drones, and law enforcement drones, as well as manned aircraft, helicopters, and stars mistakenly reported as drones. But now is a perfect time to remind you that America is one of the most conspiracy theory-prone countries in the world. It's sort of in our DNA. It's been part of our culture all the way back to the Salem witch trials and only intensified with modern technology, like on the eve of Halloween in 1938, when Orson Welles went on the radio and inadvertently started a panic.
Special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton.
That was Orson Welles' radio edition of The War of the Worlds. Those who didn't hear the beginning thought Martians really had invaded New Jersey. But that event spawned a cottage industry of alien invasion movies and television shows, and the propensity toward mass hysteria only intensified with the threat of the boogeyman of communism and the Red Scare. After American cities began putting fluoride into drinking water in the 1940s, the far-right John Birch Society opposed the move on the grounds that it was an involuntary mass medical treatment, part of a communist plot. Of course, the granddaddy of them all for modern America is the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the only presidential assassination captured on film, followed by a slew of explanations that seemed to defy what people thought they saw, despite numerous investigations. Years later, Watergate came along and brought with it the end of American innocence, a tacit admission that American politicians sometimes really were liars and crooks. In the 1990s, one of my favorite ever TV shows, The X-Files, became a cultural touchstone, telling America simply, the truth is out there. Add to that the rise of right-wing media, and particularly right-wing talk radio, where Rush Limbaugh pushed political conspiracies and led to the rise of ultra-conspiracists like Glenn Beck and Alex Jones, who also happen to be key purveyors of some of the most rampant conspiracy theories about President Barack Obama. It was Glenn Beck who wondered aloud whether FEMA under President Obama was setting up concentration camps for conservatives, just asking questions. In 2015, Alex Jones turned military training exercises in Texas into fear-mongering about martial law, claiming that it was a plan to eradicate local militants. Jones helped stir up enough fear about it that Texas Governor Greg Abbott actually had the Texas State Guard monitor the military training. And then, of course, there was the President Obama conspiracy to end all conspiracies, birtherism, the racist idea that Obama was not born in the United States, pushed by none other than Donald Trump.
Why doesn't he show his birth certificate? And you know what? I wish he would, because I think it's a terrible pall that's hanging over him.
He may have one, but there's something on that person, maybe religion, maybe it says he's a Muslim. I don't know.
That's not on birth certificates. Since Trump took his apprentice brand into politics by peddling conspiracy theories, it is no surprise, right, that we're back to it. After all, Trump's idea that he won the 2020 election is its own elaborate conspiracy theory. But this time around, the incoming administration has a slew of conspiracy theorists on the team. I mean, why have a government that tries to keep people rational when you can have a Secretary of Health and Human Services who thinks that chemicals in the water can turn kids gay, or a Director of National Intelligence who thinks there are secret U.S. biolabs in Ukraine developing weapons, or an FBI director who has said supportive things about QAnon? But that's where we are. The question now is how we confront a world where America is run by them. Joining me now is MSNBC political analyst and former Congressman David Jolly, and Angelo Carusone, president and CEO of Media Matters. Thank you both for being here. Angelo, I do want to start with you. I just have to put up this poll. Our wonderful producers looked this up. And which conspiracy theories do Americans believe are likely true? We'll just put this up on the screen. Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone in assassinating JFK. 54% believe that. Barack Obama, not born in the United States. A third, the same number that's essentially the Republican Party, the third. Voting machines were programmed to change the votes in 2020. Look at this. Definitely true. 29%, probably true 20%. So a third of Americans believe that. Vaccines have been shown to cause autism. A quarter of Americans believe that. The U.S. government was behind the 9/11 conspiracy of the 9/11 attacks. 20% believe that. The U.S. government is using COVID vaccine to microchip the population. A fifth believe that. And the 1969 moon landing didn't happen. 18% believe that. So that is the kind of society we're in, Angelo. What does it mean, particularly from a media point of view, that's what you follow and study, when the people now that are going to run the government believe conspiracy theories and push them as well?
I mean, it's like getting gasoline to the fire. I mean, one of the things that Trump did in 16, again in 20, and it really just became fully operationalized in 2024, and that now it's part and parcel with the entire Republican Party, is that they built an organized power on what used to be considered the fringes. And one of the ways that you do that is you pluck ideas and narratives from the fringes, you turn them into a story, you validate them by giving them airtime and oxygen and legitimacy and the imprimatur of a national figure, campaigning and organizing around it. And then once you're in positions of power, you start to then take actions or use official mechanisms to then stamp those as legitimate. And so that's how you get something, there's some wacky things like birds aren't real and that kind of stuff that are rising. But then you get examples of this playing out in real time. So you go from the great replacement theory, a really racist fringe idea decades ago that Jews and Democrats were importing people from other countries in order to get, sort of dilute the white population and entrench themselves political power permanently. That was relegated to the fringes. But when you start to get people that are now going to be in positions of power on their rise up, taking it, validating it, organizing it, talking about it. Now that's standard Republican Party orthodoxy. So what does it mean? Everything gets worse because you're no longer just using an alternative reality to sort of win the news cycle day to day. You're actually taking that alternative reality, and in many cases a nightmare scenario, and you're using your power in the positions of power in government to make it a reality, even though it's totally disconnected from fact. And that's the part that's so disturbing about this, is that it's about to get worse.
And they're going to operationalize it. They'll be able to because they'll have all three branches of government completely under their control, David. And to the point Angelo just made, I mean, this idea of great replacement theory is literally refuted by the fact that 55% of Hispanic men voted for Trump. So if Biden, who, by the way, Trump was president for the 4 years leading up to 2020. So who was letting in the 3 million supposed undocumented immigrants who secretly voted for Biden? Because Biden wasn't president, Trump was. Like, if the merest fact pattern breaks these conspiracy theories. But now, because so many Republicans believe it, and so many people in the base of the Republican Party believe it, we're going to have mass deportation so those people can feel better about things, right? The idea that people think that there's a conspiracy to turn boys into girls, there are all of these things people genuinely, and then there's going to be policy attached to it. To me, that seems frightening, to say nothing of the anti-vaxxers who now have a White House that's on their side, which could mean the rest of us, the rest of our kids, you got little kids, could lose access to mandatory vaccines and have to go to kids with schools who might have measles.
Yeah, Joy, conspiracy is often the currency of the modern Republican Party. And I think this is where the danger lies, kind of in where we are culturally. If you take some of the big ones, you mentioned them in the read, and you take the JFK assassination and the 9/11 attacks, there was a Warren Commission to investigate the JFK assassination that the government commissioned. There was a 9/11 commission. And in each of those cases, you had the government acting in good faith to kind of dispel many of the conspiracies and rumors. And whether or not they were accepted or not, government leaders stood on a message, regardless of party, to make sure that the facts were represented for history's sake, but also in contemporary times. That all changed with the rise of the modern Republican Party. You can go to, from birtherism to accusations of socialism to vaccine denialism to J6. Donald Trump and Republican leaders actually use conspiracy to foment division and to kind of fuel their rise to power. And I think that's where the real danger lies. And I think we also have to lean into how are they platforming this? And it's Fox News. Yes, it's Glenn Beck. Yes, it's conservative media. Yes, it's podcasts, whatever. It is Fox News. The evolution of Fox News in the last 20 years that stokes these conspiracy theories and gives platforms to these conspiracy theories, that's the real danger. I said last week that I think the greatest challenge for Democrats is not their own candidates and not Republican candidates, it's Fox News.